Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, maternal, marmoreal and ever willing to give mother. And in this case we gotta give mama what she wants because Mars has now ingressed Cancer after its extended sojourn in the electrical vacillations of the sign of Gemini over its retrograde period. And I was very grateful for many aspects of that Mars in Gemini period. I think its mercurial liveliness and intellectual vitality and need to feel empowered through informational exchange with others was part of the things that energized me enough to begin this astrological channel in which I gabble to you in that mercurial fashion. But Mars in Cancer derives its sense of power, vitality, and sexual confidence in the world through a very different modus operandus. There's a little visual experiment that I learnt from reading the writings of the great astrologers Liz Green and Howard Susportus that I find very useful for making sense of placements that on the face of it seem very nonsensical. And it's this idea of seeing the individual planets themselves as being like gods, or the archetypes and the characters of the specific gods, and then the signs that they are passing through are like the clothes that they have to dress themselves up in. And some of those items of apparel make sense, and others seem downright ridiculous, in which the archetypal energies of a god really has to move by very indirect or idiosyncratic means to find its way within that unusual field. So our classical image of Mars is of someone who is macho, burly, with rippling muscles and wearing boxing gloves. In Gemini, all of that martial power and fight goes into disseminating one's cerebral powers. Mars in Gemini is the intellectual superhero who saves the day through his cunning and quick thinking and ability to trick and smooth talk his way out of any situation, as well as his capacity for disguise, his ability to suddenly shapeshift his ideologies and ways of thinking to slot neatly into whatever situation his chameleon-like energies need to express themselves in. But Mars in Cancer, it's more like we are taking that warrior and we are dressing him up in the clothing of a 1950s housewife with, you know, a nice hairdo and a polka dot blouse and maybe a little pinafore for when he's when he's skulking around the kitchen baking everyone cookies. So Mars in Cancer is actually likely to feel most empowered and in a position of strength when it is playing the role of the caregiver, whereas a more traditional Mars might be quarrelsome and pugnacious and need to go swaggering around, picking fights so it can prove its superiority to other people. Mars in Cancer is more likely to go about things much more subtly. It is more likely to adopt a guise of seeming sweet and cute and helpless and inoffensive, because all of those things can help to put other people off their guard. If everyone thinks that you are sweet and nice and innocent and completely incapable of suddenly making a bid for power, then when you do, your sudden coup de grace is likely to be far more successful. But a lot of power can also come from playing mother. If we think about what Cancer desires as an elemental sign, it wants emotional dependence and interdependence with someone else. And in our Aquarian age, where we think that everyone must be independent, everyone must be self-sufficient, everyone must be self-contained and fully in their own authenticity without needing anyone else, this is a pretty unfortunate state of affairs to be when you're a watery individual, where suddenly the idea of wanting emotional dependence shared with someone else is now a source of shame and guilt and is believed to be a weakness, whereas in previous epochs the Cancerian notion of people coming together in warmth and joy and mutual emotional nurturance was celebrated and saturated over sentimental greetings cards. But the fact is, when you are in a sign that by its nature has to give love, has to nurture, has to give care, support and emotional food to other people, you can't be self-contained. Yes, you can build the thick keratinous skin of that crabby carapace, as we all must do if we want to get by in this world without being perpetually wounded and bruised. But still, in order to nurture and to give care, there has to be someone we are nurturing and giving care to. There has to be a child who is coming to our bosom, or a bosom to which we can go when we are feeling like the child who actually will be most in their strength when they are submitting to someone else's love, care and affection. So Mars in Cancer, in order to elicit the emotional dependence that it wants to feel emanating between it and someone else, adopts this maternal role because there is a huge amount of power in playing the maternal empress, in being this figure of comfort and warmth and marshmallowy soft squishiness that other people can come to when they are needing a bit of respite from the war zones of life, knowing that you have that kind of magnetism, that you have the capacity to make others feel safe, to let them take off their armor and just melt into you for a moment. That's a tremendous gift to be able to give other people, and to be able to sit in that power can really make you feel like a queen. But the Cancerian side also might often feel that it wants a monopoly on that maternal power, that if people come to me because I am giving them something special, that there is a special spiritual milk that is secreted from my spiritual breast that they are not giving when they seek comfort from other people, then I can be assured that those I love will keep coming back to me, and that by caregiving to them, I am receiving the caregiving that comes back to them from the intimacy that arises in that situation of giving and receiving comfort. So whilst Mars in Gemini might want to be the smartest person in the room, the one with the best witticisms and most dazzling repartees, who seemingly has the answer to everything, and if he doesn't have the answer, by God, he'll make one up that sounds more convincing and more entertaining than the actual truth. The power of Mars in Cancer is more like the power of the mother gathered around the stove, cooking the special dishes that it knows its children will find irresistible. It is the power of Hestia, of embodying the hearth and the warmth and the spirit of the home around which everyone gathers. And it's nice to be that. It's nice to feel that you are the linchpin that keeps all these emotional, familial, nuclear ties together, that you are this magnet of affection that draws people into it, and that helps to feed the part of Mars in Cancer that is empowered by feeling that other people rely on it, that other people can be your children. It is like spinach to Popeye, that kind of familial centeredness and affection. And actually one of the things you can do that will disempower and hurt Mars in Cancer the most, that will make it feel weak and as though it has been given kryptonite, is by refusing its love, by refusing its care. You know, it's a bit like when a child has grown up to a certain point and the mother's there embarrassing it in front of the other kids by being a bit too soft, and the child saying, "No, I've outgrown such affections of behavior. Can't you see I'm an independent adult now? You know, stop doing that creepy thing where you lick the handkerchief and then rub it over my face. That's not hygienic, okay? Let's not do that." That kind of refusal of the nurturance that Mars in Cancer wants to give will absolutely break its heart. And the thing is, we forget that Mars is a sensitive planet, far more so than Venus. Mars is a sensitive planet because Mars's sense of its own vitality depends on its ability to win. And if it loses, it usually loses poorly. And if Mars in Cancer loses at being a mother, then it can feel rejected over the smallest of things, and it can carry that rejection very deeply, as though it has been pierced through the heart with a splintered spear. If it can't give that mothering energy, if it doesn't feel like the love it has to give someone else it is worthy or valid enough, that then it will withdraw and hide away and cry and, you know, lurk under the covers and watch comforting, wholesome television and read comforting, wholesome books, just because it has to believe that there is still a space in the world in which the simple and wholesome relationship of a child to its mother can still be celebrated and not seen as this squalid, cynical thing that has to be fetishized or viewed in an emotionally backward and regressive way. To be a child is to regress, is to go back to those primal forces, is to go back to being a pagan spirit staring up at the moon in the sky and saying, "That's my mother. That represents something very important about the feminine cycles that I go through, how I'm constantly changing emotionally, how I'm being rebuilt and knocked down every day. And yet within that cyclicity, I find some kind of consistency. I find some kind of embodied rhythm of feeling that is somehow mirrored in the heavens above me." And if I can connect with the heavens through how I experience my emotional cycles in my own body and how I then go on to share those with other people, well, doesn't that just make you feel like Hestia herself? Doesn't that make you feel as warm as an Aga with freshly baked cookies and donuts and all kinds of pastries baking in it, just waiting to be shared with everyone? And in that moment, we can put aside all of our Geminian wit and mercurial nonsense talking. We can put aside our Saturnine world weariness. And instead, we can just sit together as a family, whether a family of blood or a family of the found love that we have found through our travels in this world. And we can just submit to the fact that we are all delighting in the indulgence of the primal animal need to eat, to be nourished, and to share those simple joys of the hearth, those fragile comforts clutched at like pacifiers in a perennially wounded world, and say, yes, this is love. And I get to share it with everyone around me. And isn't that just beautiful? But yes, so when Mars in Cancer gets rejected, when it's not able to find a position in its life where it can give out those energies and make itself that nucleus of love, that is when we see the less delightful face of the lunar goddess. This is not the virgin maiden or the round-bosomed mother, but this is the devouring crone, the vengeful, moody, irrational spirit of spite and martyrdom and resentment. You know, because Cancer is indirect. It's not like Aries, where if you upset it, it will damn well let you know right away. Mars in Cancer is going to feel hurt if it's been rejected, and it will withdraw, and it'll be a bit quiet, and it might give you the silent treatment, and you might suddenly notice there's been this shift in its mood and its temperament, and you go, "Are you okay, darling? You were fine and chatty a moment ago. Have I said or done anything wrong?" And Mars and Cancer will go, "Oh no, I'm absolutely fine. No, there's nothing wrong," and yet you still get this simpering suspicion that all is not well here, that something primal, some primal matriarchal law has been transgressed, and later on, when you least expect it, suddenly you'll be confronted with it. And all of this depends on one's relationship with Mars, of course. Cancer in general would be so ashamed of dropping that maternal facade, would be so ashamed of putting itself into aggressive and direct a position, that very often if it does feel actual anger or resentment towards someone, rather than bringing it up, it will just avoid that person, or it will withdraw, and it will hope that by withdrawing and sitting alone with its anger and sobbing it out and rewatching all of the Jane Austen period dramas that it adores so much, that eventually it'll be brought back to a state of purity. It will have finished that balsamic part of its lunar cycle and say, "Okay, I've cried into my apron long enough. I'm ready to come back now, and I just hope you appreciate me." Mars in Cancer is like Moomin Mama in Tove Janssen's wonderful creations of the Moomins, you know. She is the very heart that keeps that whole community alive, and yet so much of the time she is just this meek, nurturing, supportive force in the background who keeps everyone alive and keeps everyone fed and keeps everyone with a sense of feeling happy. But when we offer people that kind of raw primal comfort, we are in danger of becoming a part of the furniture, of just being this comforting beanbag which people go to and expect will always be there to repose on when they need those low moments, and then like a toddler that's been reinvigorated, they go back out into the world and you're sat there on your sofa stroking your hair waiting for them to return. But yes, you can seem too familiar then. You can seem like this thing that is too certain, too reliable, and therefore by withdrawing that love, by withholding those nurturing energies, by withholding the energies with which you normally feed people and keep them feeling good on that unconscious subliminal level, they can begin to say something doesn't feel right. I'm not getting mommy's milk. I'm not getting those little cuddles and head pats that make me feel so darn good. You know, why has the moon disappeared from the sky? Where has that bright, milky, pearlescent presence gone from? And then people notice, then people realize what you do for them. And that's when Mars in Cancer has found that cunning roundabout way of saying, you need me, and you will always need me. You know, we've all heard our mother say, "You'll miss me when I'm dead." And that's a wonderful expression of Mars in Cancer, that when you are used to having such unconditional, though albeit moody love directed your way, you do take it as a certainty. And when that certainty is called into question, that is when you know that Mars in Cancer needs its power move. Now, I say all of this But how comfortable someone is putting themselves openly in that position of the caregiver does depend to a large degree upon the social roles that we are permitted to play within the purviews of our culture. And I say this specifically because of how I've seen men embody Mars in Cancer. I've met some very Cancerian men who are comfortable expressing that softer side and being the gentle, cuddly teddy bear type figure who never raises their voice and who people feel safe and like they can open up to. But others who've been raised to say that all of those maternal qualities are not macho enough, are not masculine enough, often suffer deeply because of it, because they get dressed down and mocked for being too much of a softie when they're not meant to be, when they're meant to be playing a man. They are disallowed from residing in the spirit that would actually give them their power. And so I've met a lot of Cancerian men who end up just being kind of perennially spiteful and nasty and always jabbing at you sideways for reasons you don't really understand, because they're not permitted to let those energies flow. They're not permitted to be the comforting daddy as much as the comforting mummy can be. And I think that's tragic, and I think that's something we should definitely challenge in terms of culturally permitting men to occupy that space. If you don't want toxic masculinity, then you've got to be willing to permit a softer form of masculinity and not to make fun of those who occupy that territory. Because I can definitely say that in my pre-transition life, I was many times mocked for occupying that territory with my moon, which sits very strongly at my midheaven in Sagittarius. But I have a wounded Chiron in Cancer for a reason, that most of my life I have not been permitted to sit in that power. And by God, that has hurt in more ways than I could possibly tell you. And I don't want anyone else to go through that suffering. It would just all be so much nicer if we could embrace those loving, nurturing energies and see them as things to be celebrated than as a potential source of shame, weakness, and guilt. Mars is also a powerful significator of our sexual aptitudes, needs, and designs. And so it would be nice to explore some of those in more detail, especially now thanks to this new camera. I can make longer videos and therefore be a bit more lackadaisical with my timing and take things at a more serene pace. You may be noticing I'm not rushing along as manically as in my older videos where I'm trying to densely pack in as much information as possible. However, that could be because Mars gone into Cancer has changed my sense of rhythm. And Mars, because it's the planet that makes us go, because it is the engine in the car of our soul, can be a strong significator of the rhythms that we enjoy as well, and how those rhythms translate into our approach to passion and sex and lovemaking. And the rhythms of Gemini are usually fast and erratic and inconsistent, and also, as is common with many air signs, especially mutable signs, it's also indecisive. Mars wants something one moment and then it wants the next. And when it's just on the cusp of getting the one thing, it suddenly changes its mind and withdraws to something else and then might yo-yo back to it again later. And that's because Mars in Gemini is interested in the idea of coupling with someone else. The actual reality may be a disappointment compared to that ideal. And so it's always terrified of crossing that threshold over from an intellectual experience into an actual embodied one. You know, in the laboratory of our mind, we can sleep with as many people as we like and do whatever we like and try all kinds of crazy things. And we never have to worry about the consequences. We can just play about with them and entertain all these different scenarios, and it's great. But as soon as we actually do one of these things, there's the terrifying fear that we might have to commit, that we might have to be tied down to choose one thing over the multiplicity of other things we could have chosen. We could lose our freedom by doing that. And Mars in Gemini is terrified of that because its freedom is the main thing that enables it to follow its curiosities as freely as it likes. Whereas Mars in Cancer is not intellectual, it's emotional on that raw, primal, infantile level. And therefore, whereas Mars in Gemini sees the concept of coupling with someone else as being almost like an intellectual fantasy, as an idea, for Mars in Cancer, sex is more of an emotional reality. In order to feel aroused, it has to feel emotionally safe. It can't just dive into a situation and pull itself out of it like Mars in Gemini can. It wants to know that for the time being, while we are coming together to make love and enjoy one another, that this is an emotionally safe space. This is a space where I can be shy or vulnerable, or where I can be suddenly lusty and passionate. It's all about flowing along with those emotions and letting them come out. And this is so important for water signs. We talk about going with the flow, but going with the flow of your emotions is a totally different thing because they can change so rapidly. And being able to share those and explore those with someone else in a romantic or sexual setting is very fulfilling. Knowing that you can kiss someone and cry, it's a beautiful thing. Knowing you can make love to someone and share your fears and any insecurities you might have can actually be something that can bring you closer to them. And whereas Mars in Gemini, in that situation, if it saw someone crying while it was kissing them, it would think, uh-oh, this person's a bit needy and clingy. They've gone a bit too far now. This is getting too deep for my liking. I thought this was just a carefree, frivolous thing, but obviously this matters a lot more to you than to me. I don't want you tying me down and giving me a mortgage and 2 kids. I'll go to someone who's a bit more chill about these things, where there's less emotional repercussions. Whereas with Mars in Cancer, that is the beauty of courtship. It's not just about our bodies touching, and that's a very important thing, but also about our hearts touching, about the emotions flowing freely between us like a river, so that we can create this little lake, this still pond, this pool in which just for a moment we can bathe in the safety of someone else, knowing that you're not going to do anything bad to me, you're not going to mock me, you're not going to make me feel bad for who I am or how I feel, that if I do feel sensitive in that moment while we're making love, Mars in Cancer wants to trust that you'll hold me and you'll say, it's okay, take your time, I've got you, you're okay, you're in this safe space. I'm just sharing my own sexual fantasies here now. Mars has recently gone into Cancer in my solar arc progression, so I am feeling that big time though again. I think my Chiron in Cancer, which is sextile my natal Mars in Taurus, feels that energy in a big way too. But yeah, emotional vulnerability coupled with sex, that's beautiful. And therefore, the emotional part of it is, you could say a big part of the erotic foreplay is just taking that moment to be soft and tender with one another, to talk to one another, to take things down to that more subdued, serene place. You both sat on the sofa together looking at one another, and maybe you just, you talk about your innermost feelings and you stroke each other's hair and softly caress each other's faces, and, pretty soon you're ready to go with it, because you trust one another. You've created this little bubble in which that kind of wholesome love can be hatched out of the cruel egg of life and back to this kind of pre-lapsarian childhood where everything is nice and soft and fuzzy around the edges, and we can be blurred and fuzzy around the edges too. And I know you'll be there for me, and I'll be there for you, damn it. And there's more to this than just the bodies. There is the desire to want to give someone else's inner child a free place in which it can play, and it knows that all of the harsh rules of reality have been kept at a distance and everything's safe here with Mama. Anyway, I'm going to stop that there for a moment. I hope you've enjoyed this video. For those of you who have Mars in Cancer, any strong Cancerian placements or any strong lunar placements or 4th house placements, please feel free to comment in the video. I mean, anyone's comments are welcome, but it's always nice to hear from people who actually have these placements, and they can share their own experiences with me as to how these energies live through them. If you fancy any spiritual or astrological counselling with Mama Ruby, my email address will be below. You feel free to support me on Patreon if you are able. And yes, there are many other transits I have yet to catch up with this week, so bear with me. I will work through that backlog and hopefully get back on track. And yeah, all love to you.